So in this video, we're going to have a look at populations and the different relationships between organisms that are part of populations. So the first thing that we want to talk about in populations is something called carrying capacity. So the carrying capacity is the largest population of a species that an environment can support. So the carrying capacity is really how many members of a population we can have in the environment at any specific time. So for example, the carrying capacity of a farm might be 4 horses. So the farm can only support 4 horses because they only have 4 horse stalls, they only have enough food for 4 horses, and maybe they only have 4 harnesses so that those horses can be ridden. And so if they had a 5th horse, then there wouldn't be space for that horse, there wouldn't be food for that horse, and so the carrying capacity of that farm would have only been 4 horses. Now, when we're looking at things that affect carrying capacity, some of the big things are going to be whatever is available in the environment that we're in. So the different materials and energy that are available. So for example, what the temperature is like, how much water there is, or what the soil is like. If we're looking at a plant, okay, so depending on what's in the soil, those different materials that might be available could affect how large or how small the carrying capacity for that specific plant might be. Food and supplies. So food and supplies will also affect our carrying capacity. The smaller the food supply, the smaller the carrying capacity. So for example, animals are limited by their predators. So when we have an area, sometimes the population of, say, rabbits might be relatively small because there is a relatively large population of natural predators for the rabbits. So their population might end up being relatively small because they're continually being eaten by the larger predator. Now, when we're looking at carrying capacity, generally places that are warm, so have a relatively high temperature, and get quite a lot of rain, tend to have higher population densities, so their carrying capacities tend to be larger. So for instance, places along the equator tend to have really high population densities. There's a lot of a large amount of populations, and that's because there's a very good temperature, there's a lot of rainfall, so then there is a lot of vegetation available around there. And that's in like comparison to a desert, for example. So a desert has relatively small carrying capacities because there's not a lot of materials around there for living things. Now, when we look at how populations grow, populations are affected by 3 different things. So they're affected by how many people are being born into the population, how frequently individuals are dying in the population, and then how their migration rate. So birth rate is, of course, individuals being born. Our death rate is individuals dying. Individuals that have died. And then our migration rate is actually immigration minus emigration. And the difference between immigration and emigration is that immigration are individuals joining the population, and emigration are individuals who leave the population. So if you move to Nova Scotia, you are joining the population. So you're immigrating to Nova Scotia. You're joining the population of Nova Scotia. If you are leaving Ontario, you are emigrating from Ontario. So you are leaving the population of Ontario. And so depending on the rate of each of these things, that's how we know that our population is either growing or declining. And so if we have a really high birth rate but a really low death rate, then our population is going to be growing. We'll have more members being added than taken away. If we have a really high death rate but a very low birth rate, then our population will decrease in size. Now, when we're looking at how materials and energy will limit our populations, every living thing on Earth needs at least these 4 things. So every living thing needs food, we need water, we need shelter, and we need space. Now, every organism is a little bit different in terms of what type of food and how much food, how much water, how much shelter, how much space, but everything on Earth requires this for life. And so depending on how much of everything is available, that's what's going to limit the size of our populations. So lots of different things can limit populations in certain areas, like how much light they get, so how much light the area gets, the water in that area, the nutrients in the soil, for example, the temperature, the humidity, the pH of the water, different predators that are around, how much wind or how little wind, right? All of these things can limit populations, either positively or negatively. So if we have too much light, sometimes that is awesome for specific organisms. Too much light is also bad for other organisms. So it depends on the organism, sort of what amount is the perfect amount. Okay, so we're going to move on. We're going to look at the different relationships that individuals in populations can have with each other. And so the first one is a predator-prey relationship. And in this predator-prey relationship, one animal is the predator, the other organism is the prey. And so the predator is the hunter and the prey is the hunted. And so a great example here would be a lion and a zebra. So the lion would be the predator and the zebra would be the prey. We can have 2 different types of competition, and so they're called interspecific competition and intraspecific competition. Intraspecific competition is between 2 individuals of the same species. So for example, in this picture here, we have these 2 birds fighting over the seed. Okay, so they're the 2 birds of the same species and they're fighting over a seed. That is intra-specific competition. Interspecific competition is between 2 individuals that are of different species. So an example here could be a lion versus a tiger. And so a lion and a tiger competing for water or competing for the same zebra. So interspecific competition is when we have 2 individuals of different species that are fighting over something. Intraspecific when they are of the same species fighting over something. Okay, we have 3 other types of relationships. So this first one is called mutualism. Mutualism, both individuals benefit from the relationship. So an example here would be our bee and a flower. So a bee is able to land on the flower and get pollen from the flower, and so that feeds the bee, so that's beneficial for the bee. But then the bee also is able to take that pollen and move it around to a larger area than the flower would have been able to move the pollen to, and so that's beneficial to the flower as well, to get the pollen out to a larger geographical area. And so that's a mutualistic relationship where both individuals are getting something out of their relationship. Commensalism. So in commensalism, one organism benefits and the other nothing happens to. So only one organism benefits in commensalism. And so an example here would be this bird on the deer. And so this bird is hitching a ride on the deer, or is maybe able to rest a little bit while the deer kind of takes him around. And so that's beneficial for the bird. It's not beneficial for the deer, but it's also not harmful to the deer. And so that's a commensalism type relationship. Another great example of this is small fish that tend to swim behind or beside or underneath really large fish like sharks or whales. And they tend to feed on the sort of leftovers that come out of the shark mouth or the whale mouth. And so they benefit from just sort of hanging around the shark or the whale. But the whale or the shark, nothing bad happens to them, but there's nothing good about their relationship either. So there's nothing beneficial to the larger animal in that relationship. Okay, and the last type of relationship is a parasitism. And so this is a non-mutual relationship. So where one individual benefits and the other is harmed. And so an example of this would be a leech. So a leech latches onto an animal and sucks the blood of an animal. It's beneficial for the leech, not beneficial for the animal. Another great example of this would be a mosquito and a person. So mosquito biting a person would be another example of a parasitism. So one individual benefits at the expense of the other. So the other individual is harmed. Okay, so you guys now want to follow this link to play Name That Relationship game. And so you're going to be shown a series of pictures and you want to try and link what type of relationship they are. Then you should be able to start working on the moose population case study assignment and get that handed in.